I'm delighted to be joined by Lando Norris and Will Joseph. Lando Norris, very well known to everyone. Will Joseph, people might not recognise until he speaks, because you are, of course, the voice in Lando's ear. And we don't often get to speak to a driver and race engineer together. And for me, this is a great opportunity because this is such a key relationship, isn't it? And obviously, you two have been together for so long. Lando, how important is the relationship you've got with Will?
It would be a shame if I said anything but very, right? So it's been very, very important to me since 2017, 2018, yeah. Since one of my first tests ever in Formula One in Budapest. So it's been quite a journey together. But I think we've both been on it together. He's helped me a lot, kind of, with the introduction of Formula One and getting up to speed. But every weekend there's always something new, there's something extra to learn from one another. And I think it's one of the most important relationships that you have. I mean, I have my group around me, my trainer, my manager, that kind of group. But there's only one guy that speaks to me, and that's Will. And therefore, our understanding of each other, what we like, what we don't like, how we work together is one of the most important things.
And Will, you may have a completely different view of the relationship and think it's much, much harder. But obviously it is really interesting, the working relationship between the race engineer and the driver. And one of the things that's been clear about Lando right from the start is he's quite a hard worker in terms of driving technique, that kind of thing, experimenting, learning. Was that a trait you felt was there right from the start? And is that one of the reasons why Lando's been able to progress so far and you've been able to have so much success?
I mean, the driving is kind of a different domain because actually we have a performance engineer and it's their responsibility to get really into the nitty-gritty of the driving, and actually the relationship of that person, Jarve, historically, is just as important to the driving as is our relationship. So our relationship is more about communication on track. It's about when we're outside making the decisions. It's about sort of judging Lando's mood and how we're going to address that and how we're going to sort of combat those through the weekend. Whereas Jarve is solely focused on the details of the driving, that we really let Lando and Jarve operate in that domain, and I take a more holistic approach and sort of deal with the bigger picture things.
And obviously, it's such a big picture now in Formula One, isn't it, Lando? There's so much going on. People have the idea the driver jumps in the car, it's just about going quick, but that's almost the minority part of the job, isn't it? I mean, the complexity, you seem to have been very effective at getting on top of that over the years, and I guess you never stop learning in that regard.
No, you definitely never stop, and especially this year, like the most important year. There's been more that we're learning now than almost in the past at times. So there's always things you're learning, always things you're discovering, you're trying to combat and overcome, all within a matter of a session or a weekend. But like Will said, the communication is also something that, to do with strategy, to do with your approach to the weekend, that changes every single time. So you always have to be ready for whatever comes at you, whatever I might be feeling on track, whether that's more comfortable, less comfortable. You got to be ready as a team, not just me as the driver, but as a team to understand that. Is that required, or does that require setup changes or toys changes on the steering wheel, which will include more of Jarve stuff. So, like how you work as a team is very important, and I would say never relaxes in a sense, and at times becomes more important than ever, that how you work together, the efficiency, the quickness of developing the car through the weekend. All of these things are never, you get more accompanied with what they are and what you might want and not want, but in terms of the detail of how to go through these things, it never gets that much easier.
And of course, it gets incredibly hard when you're at the level that you're at now, fighting for a world championship from the start. Well, how have you found this experience? Because this is what the two of you have been working together for so long. It's been a very good start to the season in terms of being right up there in the championship fight, very hard in other ways. So now you're actually here, the two of you. How does it feel to be in this position, knowing that if you do everything right, there's a pretty good chance that come Sunday you've won?
I mean, I think privileged. We should feel privileged that we have the opportunity to be in this position, and therefore, the responsibility now falls on our shoulders to try and do the best we possibly can. I think, we have to be careful not to be bogged down by what we're trying to achieve, and actually the focus remains whereby we just try and do the best we can at every single session, with every single decision, with every single action. And if you do those and you just put them together, then kind of the score will take care of itself. If you get bogged down by the end goal or the target, then actually you can detract from what you're trying to do. So we try not to think about it in that sense, and in many senses it doesn't matter if you're trying to not be last, if you're trying to be first. You're just trying to extract every last detail and every last bit from as many points as possible. My job often is not just to try and help Lando with those, but to try and help the other engineers around us to also achieve that. So it doesn't really change, but the stakes might seem higher, but like I say, we try and forget that.
It's an interesting point, because you're kind of talking about the process focus there, which is obviously the big challenge, and you've been very successful with that, Lando. But how easy is it to do that, and what's your process for it? Because obviously there's been a lot of talk about, you're very frank about what you're going through, how you judge your driving.
Yeah.
Some people think that's a weakness. Actually,
yeah.
It's quite an important part of the process in terms of improving, or you wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So how do you see that all fitting together?
That's something that I would say I've changed over the years with. Sometimes I can be more, sometimes less critical of myself. Sometimes more and less critical of Will or Jarve, and in a constructive way. But it's what we know is the best way of getting the most out of myself, and that's fine. I know I don't need to act like certain people want or certain people believe must be done. I act in the way that I believe is best for me to get the most performance out of myself, to get the most performance out of Will and Jarve, and they all have their own ways of doing things, So together it's then how can we get the most out of one another. But there's certainly more tense moments, There's more tense moments, and it's never always perfect. And actually this year, as well as it started, have been, I would say, some of the toughest times in terms of things. The stakes are certainly higher, and therefore you're probably a little bit more disappointed when things aren't going your way because you miss out on a win or a second or a third, or a podium. Miss out on certain points, which can be more critical than ever. But at the same time, that's when you want that support from Will or from Jarve more than almost ever had before. And understanding these things in a quicker way, a more efficient way. But we got our way, and that's all we really need in the end of the day. We don't need people on the outside saying past people haven't done that or past people have done that. I think we don't care in a sense of how other people think things must be done. I think we've spent enough time together to understand what we feel is best for ourselves and what we think is best as a group. And as long as we optimize that, and we believe that we're confident in getting the most out of one another, then I think that's all we need to be happy with in the end of the day. And comes with that, then maybe a win or a podium or whatever. But I think we all want to win, and we're all not satisfied when we don't achieve what we know we can achieve. And whether that's a 5th or a win or a 10th, our success and our happiness comes from just achieving what we thought was best on the day, rather than, like Will said, has to be a win or has to be a second. So doing it our way is our best way.
Quite a bit of nodding there from you, Will. So, unfortunately, no disagreement. Really, we want the race engineer to be haranguing the driver, even out of the car. But it seems that you recognise what Lando's talking about there, and that kind of psychologist element of your job is quite important, isn't it? And some people might think, you've got a particularly difficult one because of the way Lando approaches things. But it seems a very productive mindset to have, because you're not denying areas for improvement. You're actually just focusing on where you need to get better.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like the point you made is the toughest point about my job. I think, I'm a engineer by trade. That's all I've ever done, and yet actually the engineering side, generally speaking, touch wood, I find relatively simple, whereas actually the bigger picture stuff is the much harder stuff to manage, and where the biggest opportunities now lie. We have a very trusting relationship, and I think that's probably the most important thing. So whenever something is said that other people sometimes think is bad against the other person, actually it's not. We're merely so trusting that we can be frank and honest with these things, because we know that all we're trying to do is do them better. Lando touched on it really nicely, where it says it doesn't matter if we're fighting for 10th or 1st. If any of us come out of it thinking we could have done a better job, then we go away disappointed. There's been times where Lando's put it on pole and we've come in and we've said, well, we messed up that, we didn't achieve this. It's that drive to perfect everything and be better at everything and improve everything that I think is how we get on so well.
Yeah, agree.
One of the things that, and regular listeners and watchers will get bored of me saying this, but I think one of the things that marks you out as a driver is you've developed a very broad toolkit as a driver in terms of your adaptability, techniques, the use of the tools, race stints, single laps, etc. And then we got this really interesting situation this season where the car has sort of found itself in one of the few places where it's a little bit difficult for you, which is a really interesting challenge. Can you just describe, kind of in simple terms, where the I say struggle, where the very slight struggle is that means that maybe you'll be just that few hundredths off in certain conditions on a certain track?
Well, I think that's what it is. It's not like half a second off or often tenths off. We're talking about thousands and extracting the last hundredths or thousandths out of a lap. And that can be the difference between me coming across like I'm annoyed and frustrated, or very happy. It can be hundredths or thousandths of a second. So I think we are talking smaller things. I think when you're behind the wheel, everything is exaggerated. As soon as you feel like you've missed out on 300 or 400 hundredths on a corner, you feel like, I've messed it up. What a terrible corner. But that can be the difference between me being on first or being fifth nowadays. That's how close it is. So I think this year, just a number of things have changed. McLaren is the only car I've ever driven, so it's almost what I'm most used to, but it's still changed a lot over the years. We've gone from having one of the worst cars on the grid to having the best car on the grid, and that doesn't mean it's not just as simple as the car is just quicker. How you have to drive it has changed a lot over the years, and I've had to adapt every single season to a different car. It's just always been called a McLaren, and it's always been in kind of papaya and that kind of thing, but it doesn't mean it's always been the same car. It's gone through a lot of changes, which is you would have hoped to go from last to first, and that's required a lot of adaptability from me. So in the end of the day, the answer for me being quick in a McLaren has never been because it's the only car I've driven, because the McLaren from nowadays could not be even compared to the McLaren of a few years ago. So one of my strengths, I think, is that adaptability and the ability to drive kind of whatever car I got. I also think that's just my job, to go out and drive whatever car. But then there's the compromises you make as a team. How do you get the most out of one another? How can I get the most out of the car? And how can the team give me a car that I can get the most out of? And that's where there's just been a little bit more of a struggle this season, is we made the car better, like 100%, we have the best car on the grid. But it might just be that little bit trickier for me to get those last hundredths out of. And that's just what I struggle with. But I can feel those things. And like we just touched on, I'm not happy unless I know I've kind of got everything out of it. Whether that means I'm first or third or whatever it is. So this year it's been tiny things, and honestly it's very hard to put it into just the layman's terms of I'm struggling with this or that. It's just the underlying feeling that I've had with this car. Things just aren't flowing as naturally, and then when you have to drive in a manner which is a little bit less natural, even if you're adapting to things and you're trying hard to adapt to different scenarios and different way of driving, as soon as you have to maybe think in a slightly different way, that can cost you 200s, 300s, 400s. And when you're compromising things by 2, 3, 400s, that can be the difference between being on pole or third, And therefore I complain about those things, and I'm not happy with those things because I just want to be on pole and I want to get the most out of it. We want to get the most out of it. So in the end of the day, it's just my determination to win. It's just I'm not satisfied with not winning and not performing at the best. And then I'm critical of myself. I'm critical of how we work as a team. And that's why I come across the way I do. And that's why it's been a great year, but also a difficult start to the season, because things just aren't flowing as easily as what I would like. And I'm not able to get the most out of the car as what I was like. So, it's complicated. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people just have no clue about and don't get to see. Maybe one day they get to know about it, but it's our job, Will's job, Jarv's job, my job to understand it and resurrect them as quickly as possible.
And do those characteristics make it hard to judge when you're reaching for perfection, where that perfection is? I mean, to use an example,
what it is.
To use an example from last Saturday, turn 4-5 in qualifying.
Yeah.
Phenomenally quick through the weekend. You're just trying to ramp it up a little bit more speed, tiny bit of understeer, and it sets off what happens. And judging when you need to squeeze that tiny bit of extra speed out of something and when you need to stick has got to be the biggest challenge with this car.
Especially when you're going up against Max, when you're going up against Oscar, when you're going up against George, Charles. These are all guys which are trying to do the similar thing. And you can't afford to leave 100, 200, 300s on the table. So you're having to push it to that limit. And when you want to be able to push it to the limit, you got to feel every step of the way. You got to feel you're on the limit of the braking, the turn-in phase, the cornering phase, and the exit. And as soon as you just have a little bit of a mismatch and things aren't reacting as you think they should, and you're not able to kind of predict the understeer or predict the oversteer, you're having to think. And as soon as you have to consciously think, you're losing hundredths of a second or thousandths of a second. And that's just enough to make me happy and not happy, like I said. So the harder it gets, the more precision you need. The more precision you need, the more feel and on top of the car you got to feel. And that's an area I felt like I was very good at the end of last season and really understood. And I'm not able to be as on it as I was at the end of last year. And therefore I paid the price in either some bigger mistakes or some lockups or different things. I'm not able to be as precise as what I need to be, and that's costing me. But it's not like I don't know how or why necessarily. I think we understand some of the reasoning, but we don't get many opportunities just to go out and try different things. We get a lot of laps in practice and things like that, but practice is not qualifying. It's not now you need to go out, find 1/10, but not make any mistakes. And it's a very risk-reward business where you kind of got to risk and get that reward, but you can't afford any of the failures and the downsides of it. But that's the level you got to be at when you're competing against some of the best in the world. You know, I'm sure it's a similar story in other sports. So perfection is what's needed. Absolute feeling is what's needed. And unless they're not together and not in harmony, then you're going to be struggling a little bit.
And Will, to bring you on this, obviously you get to see all of this process up front, up close, in full detail, participate in it. The way Lando works does seem very, very methodical through a weekend. He seems like a driver who will respond well to what the team tells him he needs to do. Obviously, if you get a suggestion for opportunities for pace improvement that the performance engineer will, I guess, have flagged up, he's responsive. What's it like to have a driver who is that almost easy to work with, and that you know that if you have the right inputs, you'll get the output from the driver?
I mean, it's nice to be honest. I mean, a bit like Lando, only having ever driven a McLaren, I've only ever been a race engineer for effectively Lando. You know, I was for Fernando, but I was so new and fresh that Fernando was teaching me things rather than the other way around. So I think the nice thing is that we have this relationship whereby we can do things and make suggestions, and we've built up, I guess, a language and a way of working whereby Lando might not agree with what we're suggesting, but it's done in a way whereby at least Lando understands that there is an opportunity or something we're seeing there that we could go and try and do something different. I think also a lot of people only see or hear what is shown on TV and what is aired on TV, whereas actually so much of the time in the garage there's discussions happening that no one else is privy to, or when we're back in the office no one else is privy to, and actually the on-track stuff is referring to a lot of what we've done and prepared and talked about and understood before. So the nice thing we have is that time whereby we can just refer to those things, and again it's that trust that we're all trying to achieve the same thing. I think that makes a relationship very easy, and you know, sometimes you say things which other people take as being sort of quips back to what we're saying, but we don't ever take them as that. We just understand the situation we're in.
And just to finish off, Miami coming up, the scene of the success, the breakthrough last year. It must be great to be going back there with the feelings from last year, in a great position in the championship. So it's a good place to go, isn't it?
It is a good place. Good weather, great memories. I mean, it's on the 4th this year, so it's not quite one year anniversary, but it was kind of the kickstart moment of what went on to be a very great and memorable and historic season for us as a team. But also in the period of a break, of a weekend off where, I said before that I need a little bit of a break, a little bit of a get away from things and be able to refresh, try and understand, try and improve, because it's been a great season. But it's nice to go back to a track that I performed well at, got good memories at, but off of a bit of a refresh and a bit of a time to go over things and make sure I come back stronger than where I was.
Well, thanks for the insight. Good luck to you both for Miami and for the rest of the season.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Zak Brown, CEO of McLaren. Now, Zak, you've been here now since late 2016.
Yep.
A lot of the team looks the same. There's some of the same people here, but obviously the results on track very, very different. So how much has changed? How has the team gone from where it was then to where it is now?
Everything's changed. As you mentioned, the majority of the people haven't changed. What's changed is the leadership on the racing team. They've done a wonderful job. When I started in December of 16, what I walked into was worse than I anticipated. It kind of, all the fingers were pointed at our power unit provider at the time, and knowing that I grew up going, McLaren can do no wrong, it's like, okay, kind of makes sense to me. And
you pointed some of those fingers as well.
Yeah. And when I peeled back the onion, if you'd like, I saw there were all sorts of issues going on here that all really kind of stem from a lack of leadership. Our commercial department wasn't where it needed to be, a lot because the results were very weak. The morale of the team wasn't where it needed to be. There was little transparency, little trust, and it wasn't kind of any one particular person's fault because, of course, we had issues going on at the most senior level in the ownership. So I always kind of just say there wasn't enough adult supervision on the racing team. And when you look back at when it started to go wrong, was kind of coming out of 2012. Obviously, Lewis saw what was coming, made the change, and kind of lost our way since then. Andrea Stella and his team have done an amazing job. My leadership team, Laura in finance, Daniel in HR, my commercial team, Louise, Nick, Matt, Alessandra just joined us, our communications team, because everything feeds into the performance of the race car. You need to have great sponsors to fund the technology. You get great sponsors because you have great fans that are engaged with, because your communications department, et cetera, et cetera. And so getting everyone rowing the same direction, rebuilding that trust, that belief. And it was a few key people that just provided great leadership for we have 1,400 people here at McLaren across our different forms of racing series, and things couldn't be better, but they're as tough as ever.
Was there ever a point when you wondered if you could do it? Because, to be honest, when you were appointed, obviously you had a great reputation, rightly so. Thought, yeah, Zak Brown, he's the guy for this. There was a point where I did waver a little bit and think, I'm not completely convinced. But then there seemed to be a moment where the penny dropped. A lot of things changed. Kind of started in 2018, didn't it? So I guess there was a point where you realised, okay, action.
Yeah, you weren't the only one that had some questions. It's kind of, I'm not actually really sure. I never felt like I couldn't do it, but I also felt it was a long way away and was a big mountain to climb. I always felt one of my skills are getting great people around me and keeping them motivated and figuring out what gets them motivated. So, I have a kind of saying inside here at McLaren, the racing team doesn't work for me. I work for them. And the racing team's all those different departments I mentioned. And so I knew I couldn't do it, but I felt I could get the people in place, get them the resources, the belief. I'm definitely a workaholic, so I can push people hard, but in a positive way. And so I felt ultimately we'd get back to winning. The part that might, probably surprised me and probably surprised all of us is how we went from our car in 23 to where we are now, because we were on a nice journey and then we hit this big dip. I did see that coming. That's why I made the change. So obviously when we came out and Andrea said the car is not going to be very good at the start of the year, he pretty much nailed that one. But that wasn't his work, and I did see that coming, which is why I made those changes. But the turnaround that Andrea led in the whole technical team, Pete Prod and Neil and Piers, the list goes on, has been remarkable.
It's been very interesting the kind of phases the team's gone through, because you had the first management change, if you like. Andreas Seidel came in. It seemed to be a little bit more longer term, big infrastructure projects. That seemed to be a phase you needed to go through. See, James Key came in as technical director, and then it seemed like another step needed to be made beyond that, kind of the next generation of the team, the kind of here and now, the competitive race-winning operation that we see now. So that seemed to be a clear sequence that needed to be gone through.
I think that's accurate. I think we were so behind on infrastructure that you needed to kind of get the basics right. We had a wind tunnel that we weren't using here on site, or everything was kind of outdated from a technology point of view. So I think that era, if you'd like, helped modernize the technology, and then it needed that final level of racer instinct and hard work and morale and leadership, and I think that's what Andrea brought to the table. When we won in 21, that was a pretty good season for us. That was really our 2019 team. Pete Padromo, Andrea Stella, Gilles de Ferrin, Pat Fry did a wonderful job, because our 21 car was our 20 car because of COVID. The only difference was we changed engine providers, and our 20 car, of course, was designed in 2019. So come 2021, I think everyone kind of thought, wow, this team's doing fantastic, and credit to them for sure, but it was actually our 2019 team. So if you think about who got us back on track in 2023, was a lot of our 2019 team, because in 20 and 21, some of those people weren't in the leadership positions. They were when they got the keys to the car, if you'd like, and gave us a wonderful car from Austria onwards.
And obviously Andrea Stella has been a key part of this. I must admit, when he was appointed, I kind of saw him as a continuity candidate. I've got a lot of time for Andrea Stella, obviously a great engineer, but I slightly underestimated perhaps the slight cultural shift that he brought. Did you expect that when you appointed him? Did you think,
100%.
He's just a logical one, or did you think, oh no, actually this is the guy who will inject McLaren with what it needs?
He's an unbelievable communicator. He communicates very well. He listens very well. He has a great technical understanding. He leads by example. He's a workaholic, but he's very calm. So he's done such a great job of getting politics out of the team, not letting politics into the team, building trust. And so I think some people were like, oh, I'm not so sure. I was pretty close to positive.
And obviously, it does seem the way it's set up now, very much Andrea can focus on the racing operations and technical operations. You've been able to, it seems to me, increasingly focus on really what you're here for in terms of the commercial side. And anyone who looks at the car, just the number of stickers on it compared to a few years ago, the number of partners that this team has got has gone up exponentially, and it feels like you're almost oversubscribed now with these partnerships. So that seems to be a key area of the team that's evolved, and maybe it was an area that you didn't have as much time to focus on early on as perhaps you'd have liked, or is it just that the conditions have changed?
Andrea and I have an unbelievable working relationship. He's responsible for the performance of the racing team. I'm responsible for the performance of the business, and that's the commercial. That's our shareholders. That's our fans, the brand. So, I think today's Formula One teams are so big. The days of having a single individual that kind of does it all, I think it's too much workload. You're always kind of constantly compromising. Do I go to this meeting or do I go to that meeting? With Andrea and I, it's you go to that meeting, I'll go to this meeting. And I think that allows us both to fully focus on our role. Sporting world does collide. I've been in the racing business a long time, so Andrea and I are very attached to hip. We've never had a lack of alignment. Doesn't mean we don't challenge each other, and we enjoy that. I think two heads are better than one on some of these topics. So it works really well. I'm not technical, so I'm not that excited about or understanding, quite frankly, of the more real technical depths of how you build a race car. And at the same time, that's what Andrea loves, and he's a little less interested in the commercial side of the sport. So it's a very complementary partnership.
I won't ask you endless questions, therefore, about Flexi Wings now, but It is interesting because there were times, I'm sure people remember stories about where McLaren was financially during this period. It's not been plain sailing, hasn't it? Even without the impact of COVID, which obviously caused disruption for everybody. So were there times when those waters were perhaps choppier even than people realised on the outside?
Oh, they were way choppier than people realised. And that was part of my role, was to protect the team, because we were on an upward trajectory. And I think if they knew what was going on behind the scenes, they would have been pretty uncomfortable. I was pretty uncomfortable. But I always knew we'd power through it because the shareholders are massively committed to this racing team. But, you had a lot of money that was going in our automotive business. We were losing a tremendous amount of money when we started. And, no one's got kind of an endless bank account. And so the decision was taken to bring in some investment so we could run at maximum performance, which obviously turned out to be the right decision. So it was my job to protect the team. Kind of, you can't do anything about it. That's my job. So, you guys stay focused on the racing team. I'll worry about the business. But it was pretty unpleasant there for quite some time. It's made it that much sweeter that we are where we are, because we were 9th in the championship my first year, and losing a tremendous amount of money, and we weren't far away from being in, a catastrophic situation. So to kind of go from there to now having the greatest brands in the world, the Googles, the OKXs, the MasterCards, the Dell, Cisco. I mean, you name some of the greatest companies in the world, to be profitable and to be winning races on a regular basis and competing for the championship is a pretty awesome collective turnaround from where we were 5 years ago.
Did it almost feel like you were ahead of schedule winning the Constructors' Championship last year?
Yeah, Pete Pedromo said to me at the beginning of the year, I think we can win the championship. And I was like, let's just worry about Lando getting his first win. And then once we got the first win, good, we got that out of the way. To me, it wasn't till kind of Hungary where I went, we actually might be able to win this thing. So unbelievable, the turnaround there. So I got to give hats off to Pete Prod. He called it. And, it happened. I think it caught us all a little bit by surprise how competitive we were over the course of the season. Now, I think we're such a better racing team this year than last year. I believe you learn from your mistakes. Mistakes are okay, just don't make the same one twice. So I look back on some things that we could have done differently last year, a few races that maybe got away from us, but I'm not upset by those. I think we're smarter, and if I look at our races this year, this past weekend and Saturday, that was a tough race, but the pit wall was strong. The strategy was spot on. Doesn't mean we still won't get it wrong every once in a while, but we've learned from some of our races in the past.
Do you feel that this team now has gone from being a team that can win at a reasonable rate to one that really can win consistently? Obviously, 4 wins out of 5 this season would suggest it is, although you could argue Suzuka was certainly winnable, so it's not been absolute perfection in terms of the execution, but 4 out of 5's pretty good. But does it feel like this is the old McLaren back, the team that actually can dominate and win championships without dropping the ball too often? Yeah,
I think I don't see any reason why we can't continue to be at the front. I think the sport is so competitive. I love the word dominate, but that's not in our vocabulary. Of course, that's what you want to do, but I think the sport is so competitive. Even the fact that we've won 4 or 5 races, that sounds pretty dominant. I guess it is statistically. It didn't feel like Saudi we dominated. We had Max within 2-3 seconds of us. We had Charles with a mega lap. Each qualifying session, a tenth or two's covered the top 5 cars. So, I think of domination. I think of, the Mercedes and Lewis and Nico checking out and lapping the field. We're not lapping the field. I wish we were. Australia felt pretty dominant. But other than that, every win has felt like we were one pit stop or start or tire selection away from someone beating us. So I expect the season to be very competitive. And as I said many times, I think all 4 teams will win races. I think all 7-8 drivers are capable of winning races. I think the Drivers' Championship's wide open. And in fact, Andrea just showed at our racing debrief yesterday, we're 99 points ahead of Red Bull right now. Obviously, Mercedes is in second. This time last year, we were 99 points behind Red Bull. We won the championship. They finished third. So it's way too early to be kind of having any sort of comfort that our lead is that big.
You mentioned drivers. This team's taken a somewhat different approach to some of your rivals in that you've not been in there bidding for the Max Verstappens, the Charles Leclercs, the established superstars. You've, in the case of Lando, I guess, grown your own.
Yep.
And in the case of Oscar,
we're growing another one.
Should we say picked your own and then
exactly.
nurtured him?
Exactly.
Which is a different approach.
Yeah.
Is that a conscious thing, or was it just happening to stumble on those drivers at the right time and think, no, these are the ones who can develop?
Yeah, no, it was very deliberate. Obviously, Lando we brought up through the ranks, and then Oscar we identified as kind of the next Lando, if you'd like, and they kind of dropped the ball there. Thank you, Upmar, and then was able to bring Oscar on board, and he's done a fantastic job. We have two unbelievably competitive drivers. I know everyone's kind of waiting for the big moment. I think that moment will come when they're racing each other very hard and someone gets it a little bit wrong, but I'm not worried about the outcome because we've discussed it. We know it's more of a when than an if, and I think drivers can race each other very hard and very clean, and every once in a while, someone's going to get it wrong. If you have two cars next to each other 24 times a year, it's going to happen. But I think we have a relationship with our drivers, the drivers with each other, that they can have an epic battle on track and shake hands at the end of it, even if it means there's a little tangling in between. So wouldn't have a different driver lineup as I look up and down the grid. They're great guys. They're team players. They're great in the garage. They get along well. They push each other very well. So very happy with our driver lineup.
It's an interesting point that you say it's when rather than if, because some of your opposite numbers in other teams will say, no, we got the rules of engagement, they're team players, it won't happen. Whereas you're realistic about it, which probably reflects a good racing background. But is that something you've actually spoken to them about? Say, look, we know that there's a good chance this will happen.
Yeah, and everyone's quite relaxed about it because everyone's kind of, it's racing, it's going to happen. You've seen it between teammates. You've seen it, if you had any two drivers that line up next to each other 24 times a year, what I'm very confident of is they're not going to run each other off the track, so any incident when that happens is going to be a racing incident, and maybe it'll be there with just both fighting for a corner. Maybe it'll be someone locked their brakes and went a little bit long and it was a mistake by one or the other, but we'll talk about it, we'll analyze it, we'll learn from it, but I don't see any Suzuka repeats going on with our two drivers.
And looking at the way those two drivers have evolved, obviously Lando's a little bit further on in terms of experience, kind of F1 middle age, you could almost say.
He's getting old now.
Exactly,
He's an old 25-year-old, 26, 25.
Yeah, it's definitely F1 middle age. Oscar just a little bit behind, but third season now. Do you see those two as having evolved to the point where they are at the level of a Max Verstappen? Because that's the one question people will ask, say, oh, look, McLaren's got the best car, but actually Max Verstappen at Red Bull, if he was in a McLaren, he'd have won the championship last year. It's easy for us to come up with these hypotheticals, and obviously it's something that must cross your mind. It's your job to think about that.
Yeah, I think the opposite could be said. I think if you put Oscar or Lando in the Red Bull the last couple of years, they'd have some world champions to their name. Clearly the Red Bull car is fantastic. Obviously, Max is an unbelievable driver. I think Oscar and Lando are both very capable of winning the championship this year, as is Max. I think no one should rule out George Russell and Charles Leclerc. Lewis, I think it's just a matter of time until he finds his sweet spot there, so I wouldn't rule out Lewis. Kimi in the future, obviously he's a rookie this year, doing a very good job. He's not making rookie mistakes, but being a rookie, I think it'll take him a year or two to find his feet, like it has with Oscar. But no, I think all those drivers we just mentioned there are spectacular, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses. But I think they're all world championship caliber.
And finally, as you've said, there's plenty of other threats. But with where you are now, with the team you've got, the drivers you've got, really anything other than the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship would be a failure, wouldn't it? And that's an interesting situation to be in for a team, because last year everything was almost a bonus.
Yeah.
Whereas this year it's all there for the sake of, if everything's done right, you should close it out. How does it feel to be in that position?
It's it's different to be the hunted than the hunter. Hunter's maybe a little bit more fun, but the hunt, it does mean you're on top. So they're both fun, but they kind of, one you're looking ahead, the other you're looking a little bit over your shoulder, but of course still looking ahead. We try and stay away from the word failure. I get your point. It would be disappointing. You win the championship last year, you're leading the championship now. Of course, it'd be disappointing not to win it, but it'd also be, I think, inaccurate to say, let's say we finish second and we've won 4 races already and we win another couple. You finish second and you've won 6, 7 races. Pretty good season. Yeah, of course, we're first and second in the drivers. We're leading the constructors. That's where we'd like to finish the season. Given that's where we are now, we'd be lying if we didn't say, yeah, of course, we'd be a bit disappointed if it didn't end up that way. But I think failure would be too strong of a word in such a competitive sport.
Well, considering where the team's coming from, though, to say that sort of thing could be a failure.
Yeah, no, it's a good conversation. It's a good conversation.
Well, thanks very much, Zach Brown. I hope the rest of the season we don't have too much use of the F word when it comes to McLaren.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed those conversations with Zach, Will and Lando as much as I did. Some fascinating insight there. And there will be more for the Race Members Club. I'll be sitting down with Charlie Williams from our social media team, who's been busy scurrying around, documenting the day, following the interviews and looking at these fantastic cars here on the Boulevard in McLaren. Really is fantastic to see so many amazing and historic cars here. It's quite a phenomenal place to come. No matter how many times you come here, it never ceases to impress. Now, if you're interested in the Race Members Club, head to patreon.com/the race. And if you act fast, we're giving away a free month's membership to the Race Members Club to the first 50 who use the link in the episode description to claim it. Well, Lando, Will and Zach are now making preparations for the Miami Grand Prix, and I will be doing the same. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.